Hey guys, Tim here, back with another Chicago Northwestern Harvard Subdivision update for you. We'll start with a cool clip of the big boy running pretty close to my house. We caught it riding through on its way to go on display at the College World Series here in Omaha, which was super neat to see. The other thing I want to start off with is by saying thank you to everybody that subscribed. We crossed over the 400 subscriber mark after I put out last week's video, so thank you to everybody who's been supporting the channel. And it's been a pretty busy week. The beauty of me being a teacher and it's summer is I get a lot more hobby time. So I want to start off, I did pick up a few additional pieces of rolling stock. I picked up another set of the 53-foot intermodal containers, the Kato set, which was nice because I want to have multiple long intermodal trains. I also picked up a new P42, which will be custom painted here later this summer. It's this one's got a sound decoder in it, which is great. But yeah, that's what I picked up this week. All of those from Lombard Hobbies, by the way, great store. I highly encourage you to support them. When we last left off, it was with this clip right here, where I had gotten half of the staging yard laid and I had wired up one of the tracks, and so I did the ceremonial first run of a train on the layout with that done. But then that was obviously just the start. So this week the priority was to get the rest of the staging area set up. I got the other 5 tracks down and laid. I do want to go back through and put track nails in as well. For now, it's just glued in place, which is just fine. But I was able to get everything laid and ready to roll up to that double crossover switch. So obviously then with everything being laid, I wanted to make sure to wire every staging track. Although they obviously feed in, and with the Unifrogs, there's pretty consistent wiring. I did want to make sure to go through and get every feeders to every single track. I ended up borrowing my daughter's makeup mirror, so that way I could was having a little bit of a hard time soldering the wires on the backside of all the rails. So I stole a trick from Ron's Trains and Things, and I grabbed a makeup mirror and used that to solder, and so that helps kind of speed things up a little bit. So I ended up getting like I said, all the tracks soldered and the feeders all through. My wiring is a bit of a mess right now because I'm still trying to finalize what I want to do with the wiring system, and I'm still using just the real basic Prodigy DCC. I know I want to upgrade that at some point. What I'm showing you now, the speed is it's 4 times normal speed because it took a while, but I then wanted to go through after I got the wiring done and make sure that I actually, that there was consistent pickup on every rail, no matter what. So I took the P42 and I just went up and down every single track, and also that way I could check the switches. I do need to get the caboose ground throws in still eventually, but again, the frogs aren't huge, and the way that the Unifrogs are wired, there's pretty good consistent pickup. The reason you just saw me pick up and move the locomotive is because the double crossover is still not wired at this point, and so I wasn't able to switch it over. I didn't have track on the other side, so that way it could make the crossover to the other set of 5 tracks. But again, I was able to keep going through and checking and making sure that everything was good to go, and then seeing that everything was good to go, I got the itch to really see. I wanted to continue to test not just with a single P42. So the next thing I did was I got out the locomotives that have the sound decoders on them, just because I wanted to kind of do some limit testing. So I got the 2 passenger locomotives that I had shown you a couple episodes ago, along with the scale trains, GEVO, and I wanted to make sure again that there was enough current and everything to handle not just engines running, but engines running with the sound decoders. So you can see that I was able, all 3 of them are running with their sound on right now. I tested off the running the GEVO first, and I had to do one at a time just because I didn't have a lot of track room. I couldn't just let one run, but I tested out one of the GEVOs, and then I tested out one of the ALPs going in reverse down into one of the sidings, again, just to see how it would handle it. And obviously, as you can see, it was handling it quite well. So then I kind of got in the mind, well, if it's able to handle these 3 locomotives, now it's a good chance to really see how much I can fit into the yard itself. So I filled it up with a bunch of different trains. You can see you got the Metro trains in the background along with the 400. I've got a couple tracks for intermodal, a couple tracks for the grain hoppers, one track for the auto racks, and then the foreground track is comprised of kind of what will be part of the local run. And you can see it moving here. You're going to see it's going to die as soon as it hits the double crossover, because the crossover part of that is insulated. So as soon as it crossed through that, then to the other side it didn't have any wiring. But you can see I was getting ready to move on, so I laid the straight segments prior to the curves. I cut the first hole, and then I noticed a problem. So there was the stud on the left that I anticipated, but then I also realized there was another stud really close to that on the right where the curves were supposed to go. So I had to change the layout plan slightly. I took up those 3 straight sections. You can see one of them still had pretty wet glue when I caught this error, and I'm really glad I checked that. So then I cut a new hole, and man, drywall is messier than I anticipated. So this is me cleaning up the drywall mess, but I realized I would need to have 2 different holes, one for the outgoing track, one for the ingoing track, because I had to avoid that stud. And you can see that's what the standing drywall is for. This is going to require me to cut out a pretty interesting shape of plywood to make it work, in part because this new second hole, you can see it overlaps with the plywood that I've already laid. So whatever, no big deal. I got my jigsaw out, and you can see I took all the measurements to try and make it as tight as I could, and I cut this piece of plywood that would go onto the benchwork I was about to construct, plus it would have the plywood that would go into the holes in the wall, which are about 4 inches deep. This is just me holding it. I haven't built the benchwork yet, but you can see it's pretty much a near perfect fit. So it's gonna, line up seamlessly with the existing benchwork for the staging yard, and it's gonna provide the base level within the wall before it connects to the outside. So then I grabbed just some dimensional lumber from Lowe's. I wasn't going to build a ton of benchwork yet because I'm still finalizing how I want to construct the 2 different levels, but I constructed just enough so that way I could lay the remaining plywood to finish this phase of the layout. So I put that additional sheet on. I checked to make sure that it stayed level. I ran into an issue where closer to where the camera is, it wasn't as level. I need to get a shim and help adjust for that, but that's not a huge deal. That's fine. But yeah, once I got that screwed in and fastened, I wanted to go ahead and actually run the tracks up to the wall. That's as far as I can get because we're getting the finished area of the basement painted within a couple weeks. But I wanted to get it all the way up to that point because I wanted to get that track laid so that way I could immediately move on to starting the scenic portion of the layout. I had to use a lot of weight on the curved sections of the flex track because I didn't want it to adjust at all. I wanted to keep its shape as well as possible. So that's why you see all that stuff on there. And then I actually I was one strip of flex track short in my estimates. So I had to dip into the concrete sleepers. But before I laid the third and final section, I did want to make sure I used the auto racks and the intermodal containers to check and make sure that there was enough clearance around these curves. I figured there was. Again, it looked like it should be in any rail, but one thing I mentioned last time is just because it looks good on the computer doesn't necessarily mean it's going to actually work, although in this case it did. So here's, again, that third track using the concrete ties to finish the curves going into the main layout there. And again, I checked one more time to make sure that there would be plenty of clearance even for the longer, wider rolling stock that I might end up using. Not that there's going to be trains on all 3 tracks going into and out of the staging at the same time, but you just want to make sure you don't want to be limited in terms of what your movements can be based on what your rolling stock is. So you can see it looks good, and then I needed to go through, and you can see here I wired all 3 tracks so that way I could get it ready to go. And it was time to test and make sure that everything was actually running. I ran a quick connection wire for the foreground track because this is the outbound track, right? Because the Northwestern runs the left-hand main, so you run on the left-hand side. So I started by running a grain train up right to the end just to test it. You can see I'm going to heavily weather those, but those are the newer release Autern CNW hoppers being pulled by the SD70 Ace. And backing it back up, you can see there's no loss of current or anything, even if it goes through the double crossover. You can see the 4-pole double throw switch that I'm working on wiring to help make that even more seamless. More on that in the next video. But then it was time. I wanted to make sure that, again, it would work for my sound decoder locomotives. So what I'm saying is that in June 2013, the CNW purchased the 2 test locomotives from EXO, and this was kind of their inaugural test run. I need to get my camera better focused, but this, to me, in my books, was the official kind of first run on the main line. This is the local being pulled by an SD60, and so I imagined, what it would be like going down the main line, pulling out of the siding, and because this will be one of the operation pieces, is this going down the line and then hitting the different spots, and you'll see I kind of slow it down here because I didn't want to run. There's no stop at the end there, so I didn't want to run this thing off the tracks and lose the locomotive in my testing effort. So I'm going to kind of crawl along here to make sure it looks all right. But once I could tell that was fine, I parked it there, and you can see, I'll show you here. I walked around to the other side so you can kind of see where it's parked. You can see it's sitting there just waiting for the rest of the main line to be constructed, which, again, we'll have to wait because we're getting the finished area of the basement painted here in about a week and a half, so I got to wait for that. So that's my update for this week, and I do think, at least for a while, I'll have weekly updates, maybe every other week, just because I've got a few things going on this summer. But I think I was able to get a lot done in a week. I feel really good about it. Even though I can't start building out in the finished area, I do have more work to do back here in the staging area. I need to clean up my wiring, get all 3 of these tracks over here wired, not just the closest track. I need to finish wiring that double throw switch to make sure that the crossover switch is fully wired and ready to go for DCC. But that's it for this week's update. Thanks again, and if you haven't, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and we'll get another update out very soon.